My name is Darrell Sheets. I'm a buyer by trade. I love buying storage sheds. This locker has a little bit of everything. It's just crap and cash.
He spent 32 years betting thousands of dollars on locked rooms he had never set foot inside. He found $300,000 worth of lost paintings behind a rolling metal door. He pulled comic books, diamonds, and antique furniture out of forgotten concrete boxes while cameras rolled and millions watched. They called him the Gambler, and for over a decade on Storage Wars, Darrell Sheets was the man who made risk look like instinct. Then, in April of 2026, the world lost him. And what came out afterward about the private pain behind the public bravado shocked his fans more than anything he ever found inside a locker. The man they called the Gambler. Darrell Sheets was born on May 13, 1958, in Los Angeles County, California. His father was a junk dealer and a regular at auctions, and by the time Darrell was 12 years old, he was already tagging along to estate sales, learning how to spot valuable metals, furniture, and art in piles of things other people had written off as worthless. He dropped out of high school at 16. He worked as a truck driver, a construction laborer, and a carpet installer. And then, in 1981, at the age of 23, he committed fully to the thing his father had introduced him to: storage auctions, the business of buying abandoned lockers, sight mostly unseen, and betting that whatever was inside was worth more than whatever you paid. For nearly 3 decades, Darrell Sheets did this in obscurity. He was not famous. He was not on television. He was just a man in Southern California who showed up at storage facilities, looked at lockers from a distance for a few seconds, and either bid or walked away. His style was bold to the point of reckless. He would drop thousands of dollars on units he had barely glanced at, while other buyers shook their heads. They started calling him the Gambler, and the name stuck because it was true. He was always swinging for the big hit. Then, in 2010, a television show came calling, and the man who had been gambling in silence for 3 decades was about to become one of the most beloved reality stars on American television. But before we get to the fame and the biggest finds in the history of the show, it is worth understanding what storage auctions actually are, because the stakes are real and the losses are just as common as the wins. The world of Storage Wars. Storage Wars premiered on A&E on December 1st, 2010, and the premise was simple enough to explain in one sentence, but addictive enough to sustain over a decade of television. When a renter stops paying for a storage unit, the facility eventually declares the contents abandoned and puts the locker up for public auction. Buyers gather. The rolling door goes up. They get 5 minutes to look inside from a distance. They cannot step foot in the unit. They cannot touch anything. They can only see what is visible from the doorway. And then they bid. It is, in the purest sense, a gamble. You might be bidding on a room full of priceless antiques. You might be bidding on a room full of broken furniture and mildewed clothing. You will not know until you win the auction, cut the lock, and start pulling things out. Darrell Sheets thrived in this environment because his instincts were genuinely sharp, and because he was willing to risk more money than most of his competitors. His catchphrase became legendary. When he raised his hand to bid, he would shout a word that sounded like a bark. It went so viral that A&E eventually sold merchandise with his face on it. He appeared alongside his son Brandon, who was in his early 20s when the show began, and the father-son dynamic became one of the most popular elements of the series. Brandon learned the trade from his father the same way Daryl had learned it from his, and watching them work a locker together gave the show a warmth that balanced out the competitive edge. Their banter was natural and unscripted. Brandon would shake his head at his father's riskiest bids, and Daryl would grin and bid higher anyway. The show also put Daryl into a cast of vivid competitors. There was Dave Hester, the aggressive, confrontational buyer who became his bitter rival. There was Barry Weiss, the eccentric collector. There were Brandy Passante and Jared Schultz, the young couple trying to build a business. And there was Rene Nazoda, who called himself the bargain hunter and who operated with a precision that was the opposite of Darrell's wild swings. Among all of them, Darrell stood out because he genuinely seemed to be having the time of his life. He boasted freely. He laughed when he lost. He treated every auction like an adventure rather than a transaction, and that energy was contagious. Over the course of the show, Darrell appeared in 163 episodes across 14 seasons. He became one of the most recognizable faces on A&E, and the finds he pulled out of those lockers became the stuff of reality television legend. So what did he actually find that made him famous? The answer starts with a $3,600 bet and a stack of paintings nobody expected. The $300,000 locker. The single biggest find in the history of storage wars belongs to Darrell Sheets, and it happened because of the thing that always defined him. He took a risk nobody else would have taken. During a Season 3 episode, Daryl and Brandon bid on a locker in California. The price climbed higher than most buyers were comfortable with. Daryl won it for roughly $3,600, a sum that at the time was more than his monthly mortgage payment. When the door went up, the visible contents were not obviously valuable. There were cardboard boxes, some odds and ends, and what looked like wrapped canvases leaning against the back wall. When Daryl and Brandon started unwrapping those canvases, they found paintings. Beautiful, vivid, surreal paintings by an artist named Frank Gutierrez. Daryl did not immediately know who Gutierrez was, but the quality of the work was obvious even to a non-expert eye. He called in Kathy Gallegos, the owner of Avenue 50 Studio in Los Angeles and a certified appraiser of Latin American art, to examine the collection. Gallegos spent hours going through the paintings. She confirmed they were original oils on canvas by Gutierrez, a renowned Mexican Chicano artist whose work featured dreamscapes, vibrant color, and symbolic imagery. Despite some minor damage from being in storage, the collection was in remarkable condition. Her appraisal came back at approximately $300,000. The moment the number was revealed on camera became one of the most iconic scenes in the show's history. Daryl, a man who had been gambling on storage lockers since 1981, had just turned a $3,600 bet into the biggest single locker payout the show had ever recorded. But what happened after the cameras stopped rolling is the detail that most videos about this find completely miss, and it tells you something important about who Darrell Sheets actually was. After the episode aired, Daryl did his own research and tracked down Frank Gutierrez himself. The locker had actually belonged to the artist, and rather than simply celebrating his windfall and moving on, Daryl contacted Gutierrez directly. He later posted online that the best part of the whole experience was getting to speak to the artist, calling him a very wonderful man, and adding that he was giving him back a lot of his personal items that had been in the locker. He kept the paintings. He returned the personal belongings. It was a small act of decency that never made it into the episode, and it reveals a side of the gambler that the show's editing rarely had time to explore. That was not the only time Daryl hit big, but the other finds came with their own strange stories, and not all of them ended well. The Holy Grail and the Bones. Daryl's second most famous find came during Season 5, when he bid approximately $15,000 on a large locker that turned out to be packed floor to ceiling with toys and comic books. The collection was enormous: G.I. Joes, Hot Wheels cars, specialty collectibles, and over 3,000 individual comic books stacked in long boxes. Daryl estimated the comics alone could sell for roughly $10 each. When everything was tallied, the collection was valued at around $90,000. He called it the Holy Grail of toys, and the name stuck. But storage auctions are not always treasure hunts. Sometimes what you find is unsettling, and Daryl had his share of those moments too. In one episode, he opened a locker and found a small steel lockbox. When he drilled it open on camera, inside was a velvet pouch containing what appeared to be a partial jawbone with teeth. Daryl immediately called the authorities. A deputy arrived, examined the bone, determined it was likely human but very old, possibly of archaeological origin, and took it as evidence. Daryl was never compensated. The bone was eventually returned to a tribal representative. These were the extremes of the storage auction world. One locker could contain a fortune in lost art. The next could hold human remains. And the man at the center of all of it, the one willing to roll the dice every single time, was Darrell Sheets. He laughed off the losses. He celebrated the wins. He made the whole thing look like the time of his life, which is why what happened to him in 2019 hit his fans so hard. Because it was the first time anyone realized that the gambler was not indestructible. The heart that gave out. For months leading up to his hospitalization, Daryl had been feeling off, fatigue, shortness of breath, the kind of symptoms a 60-year-old man might chalk up to age and push through, which is exactly what Daryl did until his body refused to let him push any further. In 2019, Daryl suffered a heart attack, and the diagnosis that followed was far more serious than a single cardiac event. Doctors told him he had congestive heart failure, a condition in which the heart can no longer pump blood effectively, causing fluid to back up into the lungs. Every breath became harder than the last. Daryl told his fans himself, in a social media post that carried the same blunt, no-nonsense voice he brought to the show. He said he had been very sick for 3 months. He said he had experienced a mild heart attack. He said he had been diagnosed with congestive heart failure and a serious issue in his lungs. He asked for prayers. For weeks, there was silence. Rumors spread that he had died. But Daryl came through. He left the ICU. He walked again. He survived. The aftermath, though, changed everything about his daily life. He could no longer lift heavy items. He could not stand for long periods. The physical demands of storage auctions, the very thing he had done for 32 years, were now beyond his body's capacity. He reduced his appearances on the show. His final full season was season 14, which aired in 2022. He officially retired from storage auctions in January of 2023. He moved to Lake Havasu City, Arizona, and opened a small antique store he named Havasu Show Me Your Junk. It was a quieter life. The cameras were gone. The crowds were gone. The competitive energy of auction day was replaced by the calm of a shop where people wandered in to look at old things. For a man who had spent decades feeding on adrenaline, the transition was enormous. But Daryl seemed to be adapting. He signed autographs at trade shows. He stayed connected to his fans online. He appeared, from the outside, to be a man enjoying retirement after a long and colorful career. What nobody saw was what was happening in private, and what came to light after his death would leave the people who loved him asking questions they may never fully be able to answer. The loss nobody saw coming. On April 22, 2026, police in Lake Havasu City, Arizona, responded to a call at Darrell Sheets' home in the early hours of the morning. Officers found him deceased. He was 67 years old. The Lake Havasu City Police Department issued a statement confirming his death and noting that it remained under active investigation. The news spread immediately. Tributes poured in from fans, from fellow cast members, and from the Storage Wars production team. Variety, Deadline, NBC News, and Fox News all confirmed the story. A&E acknowledged the loss of a man who had been part of their network for over a decade. 2 weeks later, on May 5th, the Mojave County Medical Examiner's Office confirmed that Darrell Sheets had taken his own life. He was 67 years old. The man who had spent 3 decades walking into dark rooms and betting on what he would find had been fighting something in private that no camera ever captured and no auction could fix. In the days immediately following his death, his Storage Wars co-star and longtime rival, Renee Nazoda, posted a video on Instagram that added a devastating layer to the story. Nazoda was visibly shaken. He said Daryl had been dealing with relentless cyberbullying. He said there had been a person really tormenting him, sending cruel messages every day about his weight, his age, and his family. Nazoda said Daryl had shown him hundreds of messages over the preceding months, that the harassment had been constant and escalating, and that Daryl had been posting about it on his own social media in the weeks before his death, trying to call attention to what was being done to him. Nazoda made a direct plea. He said he hoped the authorities would look into the person responsible and that it would not just be allowed to pass. He told his own followers that cyberbullying should never be dismissed, because you never know what someone is going through behind the scenes, what other battles they are fighting, or what a sustained campaign of cruelty might push them through. The Lake Havasu City Police Department confirmed to TMZ that they were aware of the cyberbullying accusations and that they were part of the active investigation into Daryl's death. As of the time of this recording, no charges have been filed in connection with the harassment, and the investigation remains open. What makes the cyberbullying details so painful is the contrast. On camera, Darrell Sheets was the loudest, boldest, most unshakable person in the room. He laughed off bad lockers. He celebrated wins with a shout that could be heard across a parking lot. He projected a kind of invincibility that made people believe nothing could get to him. But screens are not armor, and the version of a person that exists on television is never the whole person. Somewhere between the public bravado and the private silence of a house in a small Arizona town, something broke that the people closest to him did not see in time. And in the end, the thing that was hidden, the thing nobody could see from the outside, was the pain he was carrying behind the same smile he brought to every auction. The man behind the gambler. It is easy, looking at the arc of Darrell Sheets' life, to reduce it to the tragedy of how it ended. But that would be unfair to the man and to the life he lived. He was a high school dropout who turned a junk dealer's education into a career that made him a household name. He raised a son who worked beside him on national television and learned the same trade the same way Daryl had learned it from his own father. He pulled the biggest single find in Storage Wars history out of a $3,600 locker and then tracked down the artist to return his personal belongings. He survived a heart attack and congestive heart failure and came back strong enough to keep working. He opened a store in a small Arizona town and kept doing the thing he loved in a quieter way. Darrell Sheets lived loudly, bid boldly, and treated every locked door like it might be hiding something extraordinary. He was not always right. Sometimes the locker was full of broken furniture and mildew, but he never stopped believing the next one might be the big hit. The cyberbullying investigation remains open. The questions about what pushed him to the edge may take time to answer, and some of those answers may never fully arrive. What is clear is that the public face and the private reality were further apart than anyone who watched him on television ever realized. And that gap between the man the cameras showed and the man who sat alone at night reading cruel messages on his phone is the part of this story that should stay with every person watching this video. Darrell Sheets opened over 1,000 lockers in 32 years. The biggest treasure he ever found was a room full of paintings by an artist he had never heard of. But the biggest thing he left behind was a family, a legacy, and a reminder that the people we laugh with on screen may be carrying more than we know. If you liked this, hit like and subscribe, and make sure to check out our other videos. If you or someone you know is struggling, please contact the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by calling or texting 988.